Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski. I will be your host for today, and I'm really excited for today's event. So, as many of you may know, we have little satellite BGAN units about the size of a textbook, and we send them all around the world with different scientists and explorers, and they're able to video broadcast from really remote locations. So I'm very excited today to be joined by Andrea Marshall. She is a National Geographic explorer. She's a marine biologist who specializes in mantas. In fact, she was the first person to get her PhD studying mantas. Right now, she is in Mozambique. She's on a beautiful stretch of beach. She's out in the field doing some field work, and we're going to get a chance to talk to her a little bit today, learn a little bit more about her and what she's doing, and you'll get a chance to ask her some questions. So, Andrea, it's so great to have you joining us today.
I barely made it in. I've been in the water all day. We just came back onto the shore, and we barely made the tide. We live in an area where there's a lot of tidal flux, and so we barely got the boat in. And I ran up to our little sort of hut. So we have a little bit of a working hut where we do our droning and some of the spotting of the animals. So I just got here, very sweaty, but really happy to be with you guys today.
All right. So for our classrooms who might want to try and pin your location down on a map later, where are you on the coast? Andrea, are you still able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Pinning the location on a map.
Yeah.
If you can hear me, I'm basically sitting at the most northern part of Bazaruto Archipelago in Mozambique, which is about a quarter of the way up the country. And it's in a really sort of archipelago that consists of about 5 different beautiful sand dune islands. And I'm in the very north of the most northerly island, the largest one called Bazaruto Island. That's where we're sitting right now.
Okay, awesome. So you're out in the field right now. What are you guys up to? What are you doing out in the field?
From the whole days of field work. So every day we have to get up really early and be able to jump out on our boat to be able to have some water to make it out to the ocean. As I mentioned before, we live in an archipelago. So the water goes in and out and quite severely. So you can see there's no water at the moment. So we have to wake up really early in the morning when there's still water available. And we get out to the sea and we spend all day surveying for some of the marine megafauna that we study. I specialize in manta rays, but we have researchers here that specialize in whale sharks and also predatory sharks, bull sharks, and other types of rays. So we're out in the water all day finding these animals and identifying them. We do a lot of photos. We take samples, tissue samples to do genetic work. And we're also looking at like distribution. So where they live, how many live where. And we're kind of trying to understand more about the population, where they hang out, where their most critical habitats are, so that we can inform the park, understand where the animals live and how they're treated, so that they can better protect the animals in their park.
All right. So we're getting the audio coming in nicely, but the video is a little bit choppy today. There might not be anything we can do about it. Can you just tell me, Andrea, what signal were you able to lock in on today with the BGAN unit?
Check for you. Let me see if I can pull it closer. I don't know if that's going to interrupt the signal, but we'll try.
Yeah, don't move
a little bit closer.
No, don't move the unit once it's locked in, because we'll lose you for sure.
Okay, for sure. All right, well, yeah. I can try and go out a little bit more towards the unit. It's quite sunny out here, but I'll try and see what I can do.
Well, you still look good, and that improved the video quality immediately. So that might be our best bet for a little bit. So it sounds like you're doing, it sounds like you're doing some great work. I mentioned at the start you were the first person to get your PhD in mantas. And can you tell the classes who are joining us a little bit about mantas and what kind of pulled you in to studying them?
Sure. Mantas are actually the largest living ray. So there's a lot of different species of rays out there. People don't know them as well as the sharks because sharks are on TV more often. But sharks are in trouble, but more ray species are actually in trouble than sharks. And so we need a lot more people to study our rays. There's about 650 or so species of rays out there. Mantas are the very largest of any of the rays, so they can get up to about 24, 25 maybe feet across from wingtip to wingtip. So really massive animals, but they're very, very gentle. One of the reasons I started studying mantas is because we saw direct threats to populations of mantas around the world, just like sharks. They were being caught and sold and used in Asia for health tonics. And so we started to see like really big declines in their populations. And there wasn't really anyone doing long-term studies on mantas at the time. So I offered to kind of start. And I found an amazing population out here in Mozambique. And I've been studying it for the last 16 years to try and learn more about what has turned out to be the most important population of mantas in Africa. And we're working very hard to protect this population now, but we've also used the information that we've gathered from this population to try and save other populations around the world because we have such a long-running study that we've gotten such great information about how the animals spend their time and more about how they reproduce. And that's helped people around the world protect their mantas better as well.
Excellent. And early on, after spending some time in Mozambique, you co-founded the Marine Megafauna Foundation, through which you're doing some incredible research and conservation work with species like mantas and whale sharks and other large marine animals. Can you tell us just a little bit about the foundation?
Sure. Yeah, I was really excited to be able to start my own organization. I was kind of frustrated to a certain extent about not being able to be out in the field as much as I wanted with some of these other organizations. And so when I finished my PhD, I started my own organization so that I could spend as much time as I could in developing countries in the field because I feel like that's really, really important to understanding more about these animals, working with local communities. I was out with one of the local communities that we work with today. We run, and it's really amazing to work with communities across the world long-term, where you build relationships and you get to see how the work that you do, the outreach that you do affects these communities over time. And you can see people falling in love with the ocean, and you can really see these kids starting to connect with the ocean for the first time. And a lot of them now want to be diving instructors or they want to be researchers too. And so it's really cool. And I'm really proud of the work that MMF does in different parts of the world. Not just research, but all our community work as well.
All right, excellent. Well, one thing that you've done is you've started a website, kind of like a manta matchmaker website. It's not a dating site for mantas. What is it? What is this website for?
Yeah, a lot of people wonder because it's called Manta Matcher, and it's not a dating site for mantas. It's the very first sort of global online automated database for mantas. And the idea is that I was a diver when I was 11, 12 years old. And I remember being really frustrated as a young budding scientist, but also just as a person and as a diver who wanted to do something for the ocean. I really wanted to be able to contribute to efforts, but I wasn't old enough at the time, or some people don't feel like they have the expertise to be able to help. And so I created an online database for mantas where it's not just for scientists, but anyone from the public can contribute to these databases. And it really helps us researchers because our research groups can only collect so much data at a time. And when you have people around the world, all kinds of divers collecting data for you, you can get much more done in a much shorter period of time. So now anyone can go out into the field and they take a photo of a manta and they basically can ID that manta by its spot patterns underneath its body. And then they're able to upload that manta onto the Manta Matcher site. And then researchers across the world, they can all use that information as well. So getting a really good idea of how many mantas we have around the globe, where they live, how long they live, all kinds of cool information is coming in.
All right, perfect. So being out in the field means you're not alone, you're working with a team, and it means that you have some gear and equipment. Is there anything that you're able to show us today that you're working with during this period of time in the field?
Hope I hope I can get back to my hut. So this is one of our sort of working huts in the field. You can see just over my shoulder, there's, it's not very much, but we kind of work out of these little huts. And before you called, we were doing some droning. We just got in. You can see our drone there. One of the things that we love is to be able to go up in the sky. We have a much better vantage point of the animals that we're studying. And we can sort of pinpoint where the majority of them are, and then we can send the boat to that area. So we do a lot of counting of animals using our drones. We use DJI drones and sort of other drones as well. My husband's also a pilot, so sometimes. But the majority of the work we do is in water. And so like today, we were out, let's see if I can switch. We were out in the field today taking a bunch of photos of some mantas. So you can see some of the mantas we were taking photos of today. And when I was telling you about that manta matcher site, these are the types of photos that we want. So every manta has a unique spot pattern on its belly. And every single manta can be, differentiated by that spot pattern there. And so these are the types of photos that we like to get of the animals, because now I know that individual for life once I take its photo, and then I can upload that to Manta Matcher. So that's pretty cool. We kind of use these large camera systems. Take with me underwater. I'll just put it out. It's pretty big. So these are the types of housings that I take underwater when I go diving. And that allows me to take the photos that you're seeing. They're pretty heavy, but once they get in the water, it's pretty light and easy to use. It's hard to swim after some of these animals. So I use these giant fins. I use freediving fins. There's actually a gecko on my fin right now. But we use these giant freediving fins so that I can chase the mantas down, because sometimes they swim pretty fast. So yeah, this is like my average kind of gear. Yeah.
All right, perfect. So we were able to see some of that gear. If you don't mind moving closer to the unit again, just to clean up our video a little.
Sure.
Perfect. So I think in about a minute, I think we should jump in and we should meet some of the classrooms and get some of their questions. But before we do that, Andrea, I have a few pictures that you shared with me in the past with the mantas. So I've got about 5 of them pulled up on my screen. I'm just going to share them for the students, because I think it shows some really good scale of you with the mantas. So I'm just going to share that on my screen really quickly so the classes can see, and then let's jump into some Q&A. So boys and girls, I'm just sharing my screen, and I'm going to show you a few pictures Andrea shared with me in the past, and you'll be able to see some of the size. So here's a picture of her in Ecuador, which is another one of her field sites. Andrea, can you see these on your end? Probably really small.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Perfect. So here's a great scale shot. And then here's another one in Mexico. And Andrea has one of those full kind of masks on. Were you able to communicate with that one? Talk to other divers?
Yeah, I mean, we use those units when we're doing technical diving, when it's kind of dangerous and we need to be able to communicate with one another. I also use those types of units if I'm doing any type of work for television, like Nat Geo. I like to be able to actually talk people through what they're seeing underwater, and it's really nice to actually be able to speak underwater. But I don't do it all the time, because I also enjoy just the silence underwater, but they can be helpful in certain circumstances.
All right, excellent. So I've just pulled up another shot from Mexico of a giant manta. It's got a remora hitching a ride on top. We've got a nice little silhouette shot looking up. And then there's a shot of a cleaning station. So do you want to just quickly, briefly tell us a little bit about a cleaning station, Andrea?
Yeah, that's actually where I was at today. So the cleaning stations are kind of patches of reef that mantas know they can come and be cleaned by specific fish. And these fish all attend to different parts of the mantas. Different species of fish attend to different parts of the mantas. And it's essentially kind of like grooming. It's kind of like going to the beauty salon or something every day before going off to work. They can pick off parasites or algal buildup. A lot of the sharks here in Mozambique, 75% of the sharks we have here in Mozambique have really large shark bites. And those shark bites tend to get infected. And so by going to the cleaning stations every day, the mantas can have the little fish attend to those wounds, and they kind of promote healing, and they make the mantas feel better. And so that's a huge health benefit for their day at these cleaning stations. And it's a great way for researchers to be able to find, because we know where the cleaning stations are too, and it makes our job a little bit easier every day.
All right, excellent. The final photo that I've shared is a really good selfie of you with a manta just cooperating beautifully for the shot. So I thought it was great to show these for a little bit of perspective of just how big they get. They're such beautiful and graceful animals, and they get so big.
Yeah, it's
all
one
right.
of the things that's great about mantas is they're so big, but they're very friendly, and they can't hurt you at all. They hardly have any teeth to speak of. They don't have a stinging spine, so nobody has to worry when they're in the water with a manta.
Perfect. Well, let's meet some classrooms, because I have no doubt that they've got some questions here. So we're going to go first to some second graders in Freehold, New Jersey. They're with Mrs. Glusko and Mrs. Peters. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, grade twos? All right. Anyone have a question for Andrea?
I have one. How do you touch the anchovies underneath the water?
So just to check, was that how do you touch them under the water?
Yeah.
Well, I definitely think, good question. I don't encourage touching, because I actually think, you have to the kind of personal space of any wild animal. But there are some times that I have to get really close to mantas, or sometimes do something like pick off a parasite or put on a satellite tag, or sometimes they're entangled in nets and I need to cut those nets off. The interesting thing about mantas is they have great sensory system, and so I can kind of sneak up behind the mantas and quite gently put my hand on them if I'm going to cut a net off, or if I'm going to put a tag on, and you can feel their skin respond to my touch, so they know that I'm there, even though their eyes are on the front of their, and definitely can't see me, but they can feel me there. And just a gentle light touch before I do whatever it is that I'm going to do sometimes just gives them that assurance that I'm not going to hurt them. But ordinarily, if I don't have to touch them for some specific reason, I try not to, because I definitely think that manta rays prefer if you give them a little bit of space.
All right, great question. So let's jump to Mr. Tyndale's class, because they're on a tight time schedule today. They're joining us in Ontario, Canada, and I think they're grade 4 or 5. Is that correct, Mr. Tyndale? Grade 4 or 5?
Yes,
All right, who's got a question?
Riley does. Go ahead, Riley.
Is there a reason it's called a manta?
Did you hear that, Andrea? They're wondering if there's is there a reason they're called mantas? Does it mean something?
Does it mean something? Absolutely. Manta actually means blanket or cloak in Spanish. And when you see a manta underwater, you'll understand that they look like a giant flying carpet or a blanket. They're very kind of like flat and graceful. They kind of move like you would imagine a blanket would move underwater. So that's the origin of their name. Commonly, the group is known as the devilfish as well, which I don't like at all, because I think it really gives sort of a negative kind of image to the mantas. And that came because they have these cephalic fins on the front of their head. They kind of unroll and can use for feeding. But because they have two on the front of their head, people thought they looked like horns, like devil horns. So the whole group got the name the devilfish. I much prefer the name manta, because I do think they look like a blanket or a flying carpet. And yeah, I encourage people to call them by their real name.
All right, awesome. So Mr. Tyndale, I know you guys have to run, but I can let you squeeze one more question in if you have one.
One of the students have a question, but I'm just curious. She said that there was a gecko on one of her pieces of field equipment. We have 2 in our classroom as pets, and I'm wondering if she knows what gecko she has, or if she could kind of swing her camera so we could see the gecko, because we're just curious. If it's possible, if it's not too much trouble.
Oh, I would love to, but every time I go over to my hut, Joe yells at me because he says I lose connection. And it might be gone from my fin now, but we have them all over the place and we love them here. They're our little friends. And you know what? I'm not exactly sure what species they are because I've never looked it up. You know, they're everywhere. So I just, you know, happily call them geckos, but we have everything, lizards, skinks, all kinds of things here. And yeah, they eat all the mosquitoes for us. So
Well, I'd authorize a quick peek if you thought the gecko was still there.
Let me just see. Let me get one. Lucas, can you check to see if there's any geckos around? Or there was one on my fin. There might be something else around too. I have one of my students checking. You have an fin's gone, but let me just see if I can get another one. Oh, I don't know what this one is, but here's one up on our hut. Can you guys see it?
Yep.
Let me give another angle. I don't know what this little guy is, but they can see it right there. He's missing part of his tail. Yeah?
Yeah, very cool.
Back out now.
It came in nicely.
All right.
I'm taking that.
We'll just show you quickly, because we know you've got other classrooms as well.
Okay, I think we're...
Take him out, Addie. 2, 1, and...
Got him.
Okay, here, she's got one.
Oh.
You're going to have to hold him up a little bit.
Yeah, hold it up a little higher, right by the camera.
Addie.
Very cool.
He lost his tail.
Cool.
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Oh, he lost his tail too.
All right, that's awesome, 4-5. Thanks so much for sharing your gecko with us. We got to see a Ontario gecko and one right in Mozambique. Looks like a couple. All right, very cool. Thank you so much, boys and girls. Let's see. Let's go to Mr. Lavogue's grade 6s. They're in North Palm Beach, Florida. Let me turn their microphone on. How we doing, grade 6s?
Cool.
What up, though?
Like,
do I know that?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Do I ask?
Yeah, go ahead. Ask your question.
There was a manta ray off our coast a month ago that was being reported as a new species. Are you familiar with the sighting off of West Palm Beach?
Yeah, the guy who shot that video is sitting about 400 meters away from me right now. He's one of our donors and very good friend. And I was just going to say, when I heard you guys were from Palm Beach, we actually have a project there. And it is, in fact, a potentially new species. I believe it is anyway, and I'm going to hopefully formally announce that species later this year. That work was funded by National Geographic, and off the back of it, we started a project off Eastern Florida. And so hopefully you guys will actually see us around. We have people in the water all the way from Palm Beach all the way up to St. Augustine doing research on mantas now, and I'm actually on my way there in a few weeks. So you guys might see some more footage on TV from Palm Beach in a few weeks. But yes, you have a lot of manta rays off that coast. A lot of people didn't know that there was such a large population off that coast. But yes, during the kind of your summer months from about May to maybe August, hundreds and hundreds of manta rays aggregate off the Eastern Florida coastline. From about Palm Beach is about the furthest south we see them, all the way up to St. Augustine and even further up into Georgia and stuff. Really big and important manta population, and yes, we do believe that's a new species. And I'll tell the drone photographer that you guys caught his work online.
All right, awesome. So little connections like that. The world's not quite as big as we think it is sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Ruffin's class joining us from Rochester, Minnesota, grade 5 class. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, grade 5s?
Good. Okay, so I was wondering, I saw a lot of black and white on the manta rays. Do they come in different colors too?
No one's ever asked me that question. You know what? Every single time I do something with Joe, I get a question that I've never heard before. So you're that person today. And no, they don't come in the colors that I'm thinking that you're asking about, but they do come in different colors. So typically a manta is shaded like kind of like a shark is shaded or a whale is shaded. It's called counter shading, where the back of the animal is much darker. So if you're looking down on it through the ocean, it kind of blends in with the sea floor and the dark blue water underneath you. And if you're looking up at the animal, it's much lighter on its underside. So it's on its belly, it'll be really, really white. And that predator looking up at the surface, it's also pretty camouflaged. So that's called counter shading. A lot of animals in the ocean are counter shaded. And typically mantas have that normal counter shading color. But mantas are the only shark and ray that also has what's called a black form or a black morph. And that means almost the entire manta ray is black. Sometimes they have a little bit of white just on their chest, but almost the entire manta ray is black. And so that's a really rare color form. It's not really so much a color as being black. And then there's also mantas that are not really albinos, but they have a genetic mutation that causes almost no pigment in their body. So they're almost white. They're not entirely white like an albino, but they're almost entirely white. So you have a normal manta, a black manta, and a white manta. So not really maybe the colors you were thinking about, but yes, they come in different kind of color types.
Awesome. Great question. I'm glad we kept our streak alive of a new question for every event. So that's great. We're going to jump to back to Ontario here in Canada. We have a grade 3 classroom in Belleville, Ontario, and they've got some provincial testing later in the day. So this is kind of like their fun relaxation to hang out with you today. So let me turn their microphone on.
Good luck, guys.
Hey, grade 3s.
Morning.
All right, who's got a question?
How old were you when you started to think that your dream was to help animals?
That's a great question. And to tell you the truth, I actually know because my mom tells me that I was 5. So as she said, when I was 5, I started saying that I wanted to study the ocean and I wanted to study specifically sharks. And she said I never stopped saying that from the time I was 5 until now. That's all I've ever wanted to do. But, you know, I didn't remember that I wanted to do that since I was 5. Ever since I can remember, I wanted to study sharks, but I didn't realize that I got that kind of thing into my head so early. But yeah, I was 5.
All right, awesome. And then our final live classroom with Mrs. Benny. They are in Hamilton, Ontario, so not too far from me. It's another grade 4 or 5 classroom. And Mrs. Benny, I'll just need you to unmute for me because you're on an iPad today. And then be really loud.
Okay. Ask the question.
Did you ever get hurt by a manta ray?
Did you ever get hurt by a manta ray?
Yeah, no, I got that. That's a good question. And thanks for asking that. You know, manta rays, as I said before, they're really gentle animals and they don't really have, I mean, they have teeth, but they're so tiny. So they can't really, you know, bite you, and they're not like a stingray. They don't have a stinging spine, so they can't accidentally sting you. But, you know, there are times just because an animal is so big that sometimes you end up getting hurt, but that's usually your fault, not the manta's fault. So there's been a couple of times where, you know, I've had not close calls, but I've had incidents, and that's usually when a manta has been entangled. Sometimes they get entangled in fishing line or nets, and they're dragging them, and they're, you know, going to die. And so I kind of swim up and I try and cut the nets off. And just because the animals are so large, you know, when they move around, sometimes you can get entangled yourself, or sometimes they can accidentally hit you with a wing when you're doing that. And one time I almost got knocked out because, you know, it almost, you know, gave me a right hook in the jaw as I was trying to free it. But like I said, those are always incidents where you're putting yourself in a situation where you know there's a potential of you getting hurt. But the mantas themselves are not aggressive at all. They're the most gentle animals you could ever imagine underwater. They're very curious, so they'll come see you, but they have an ability to, even if they come and inspect you, they'll always miss you by just a couple of inches. They'll go straight over your head, and they'll always miss you by a few inches. So yeah, they're really gentle animals. No one ever should worry about being in the water with a manta.
Awesome. And I remember during one of our events, you told me something that really surprised me. Normally, kind of the sound of scuba gear kind of causes animals to kind of head in the other direction, but mantas like those bubbles.
Yeah, that's something that people don't know, that mantas have really large brains. A lot of people don't know that manta rays have the largest brain of any marine fish. So, you know, really special because of their really large brain size. And one of the areas that's enlarged is for hearing. And for a long time, and even now, we're still not entirely sure about all of the reasons why a manta needs to hear underwater, but we've started to realize that they may use things like jumping out of the water and the noise that's produced when they hit the water surface to communicate with one another, and they may use hearing for other things, but they definitely can hear divers' bubbles. And so I oftentimes use rebreathers. I don't know if you guys know what those are, but they're units that you can take underwater where it recycles your breath, so you don't actually exhale any bubbles. So they're very quiet. And we use those animals that are frightened by bubbles, or if we're going into a wreck and we don't want the bubbles to dislodge any sediment. And we sometimes use them for mantas, but when we do, the mantas never come in. And it's only when we switch to scuba and the noise that the air bubbles cause when they're released, then mantas actually hear where we are and they come in to inspect us. So it's definitely one of the things that we noted early on, and now we use mostly scuba when we're out doing work with mantas in the ocean.
Excellent. So we still have a few more minutes. So let's visit a few more classrooms if you have a few more minutes, Andrea.
Definitely.
All right, back to Florida with our grade 6s. Do you guys have another question?
Yes, we do. Everett, do you want to ask?
Sure. So where would manta rays be most comfortable living? So what ocean, or are they just all over the world?
Yeah, what's the best place for a manta to live?
That's a great question. You know, that's one of the key questions that we've been trying to find out for the last 15 years that I've been working on mantas, is where do they prefer to live? What habitat is the most important for them? And the reason we need to understand that is so we know, you know, what areas of the world to protect. You know, if we're going to protect their populations, we have to protect the habitat that they prefer. Now, we know that mantas exist in almost all of the world's oceans, certainly the major oceans like the Atlantic and the Pacific and the Indian Ocean and their associated water bodies. There's large populations of mantas all over the place, but we definitely have started to realize that they prefer certain types of habitat. So areas of the world where there's a lot of productivity, and what I mean by that is there may be like specific ocean currents that are coming together, converging, or there might be a lot of upwelling, deep water that's close to a coast. And so it's pushing all of this water up to the coast, and that causes a lot of plankton to bloom. And that's what manta rays feed on. They feed on the smallest little animals in our oceans, things called zooplankton. So that can be things like little shrimps or little fish eggs. So wherever you get a lot of food in the water, a lot of productivity, we say, you find big manta populations. Mantas tend to prefer warmer water, though, so we don't really see them in the higher latitudes, or you know, we don't really see them, you know, in the Arctic, obviously, or any really cold water. So they definitely prefer warmer water, but warmer, productive water where there's lots of food available. And then they definitely like to be in close proximity to land because they like to go to those cleaning stations I told you about. So even though they can move into really deep ocean areas, you know, like really remote places far offshore, they always like to come back to land because they like to visit these shallow water reefs on a regular basis so that they can get cleaned. And so we've started getting good at predicting where animals will find the mantas, because if you look around the world at a map and you kind of look at the areas that are most productive or that are warm and are at certain latitudes and are close to shore, that you can start telling where you're going to find these animals based on you know, what they like.
All right, so let's jump to Mr. Ruffin's class again in Minnesota. Let me turn your microphone on. You guys have another question? You look nice and comfortable.
Yeah, he's coming.
What's the biggest manta ray you've ever seen?
Yeah, I've seen some big ones. I've been very lucky. I get to travel all over the world and do work on mantas. The place I see the biggest individuals is in Ecuador. I think Joe showed you at least one photo from Ecuador with some of the big mantas we have there. And I have seen mantas that reach sort of 7 meters, so about 20, maybe 21 feet there. So those are the biggest mantas I've ever seen. And they literally look like spaceships when they fly over you. I mean, the entire sun is blighted out when they go over your head. So yeah, it's pretty impressive to see an animal that large, especially when they're so gentle. You know, it just looks like this spaceship that's coming over your head. It's pretty awesome.
That's incredible. So jealous. Grade 3s, Mrs. Waterhouse. Do you guys have one more question?
How long has mantas been on Earth?
How long have mantas been around? That's a great question. So, you know, a long time ago, not a long time ago, but a while back, someone was interested in that question, and they were trying to answer it in the same way that many researchers answer the question of how long have sharks been on the planet. And luckily for sharks and rays too, they leave kind of like breadcrumbs for us around the world. So all sharks and rays kind of have rows of teeth. And those teeth fall out over time. And so over the course of an animal's life, they're going to be losing hundreds of teeth. And those usually get preserved well, you know, in fossil beds and whatnot. And so in the same way that people have dated sharks back millions and millions of years, people have dated in terms of the confirmed sort of date that we know, you know, mantas were around is about 5 million years. So we know that they've been around for at least 5 million years because people have dated teeth back to 5 million years. Again, we don't know for sure, but we at least know from that person's research that they've been around for at least 5 million years. But one of the things that we do know about mantas is they're one of the most recently evolved shark and rays in the group. So where sharks have been around for upwards of 400 million years, mantas have been around for a very short time relatively to the rest of the animals in that group. But really great question.
All right, and we'll give final question to Mrs. Benny's class. If you don't mind turning your microphone back on for me on the iPad, and you guys can wrap us up today.
Can you hear us now?
We gotcha.
Yes.
Okay.
What is your favorite species of ray or manta ray?
So what is your favorite species of ray?
I'm gonna have to go out on a limb and say my favorite species of ray is a manta because, you know, I'm quite obsessed with them. That's what I study for a living. So I do love them a lot. But there are so many really cool rays out there. If I had to tell you what ray that I want to see the most, it's definitely like a sawfish. I really, really love sawfish. I think they're amazing. They're also highly endangered. It's very, very difficult to see them. I've been diving for almost 30 years and I've never seen one in the wild. So I do love them, maybe not as much as mantas, but if I had a wish list of rays that I'd like to see, that one would definitely top my list.
All right. Well, first of all, boys and girls, thank you so much for a great series of questions. We had 6 awesome classrooms join us live today on short notice, so that was great. And Andrea, the connection went really well. We got to see some cool gear. Do you mind just panning around one more time and showing us that lovely beach view?
Yeah, there's our little working hut that we work out of. And here's the beautiful, it's getting sunset here. This is the beautiful Mozambican coastline, very remote, very beautiful place.
All right. Well, I think we did very well today. The satellite held up. We got to have a great connection with you. I know the students learned a lot about mantas and what you're doing in the field. And yeah, so I think on most social medias, they could find you. I know on Twitter for sure, @Queen of Mantas. Is that the same for Instagram?
yeah, it's pretty much the same across the board. And I encourage you guys to follow along. There's lots of cool things to learn, and we're pretty active on social media. So please follow us if you're interested. And thank you, Joe, for doing this. It's so awesome to be able to share our work directly from the field. I don't know if you guys realize how remote some of these locations are, that he's able to broadcast explorers like in the most remote parts of the world. And I really commend you for connecting us, because it's really a joy for us to be able to connect with classrooms around the world too. So thanks very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you for lugging it out into the field. Good luck with the rest of the work, and we'll definitely see you again on Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks so much. Classrooms, thank you. Microphone's coming on if you want to say goodbye and thank you. And then we'll sign off for today. So nice and loud.
Notice my question.
All right.